Welcome to the second shir in the series of Kitchen, Shilos, and Shabbos. So last week we spoke about the dinim of cooking on Shabbos. When is it considered cooking, when not? This week we're going to focus on how are you allowed to leave pots on the fire erev Shabbos, in what manner, and on Shabbos itself, when are you allowed to return pots and put them back on the fire? If we have time, we'll also discuss the malacha of Lerner, selecting on Shabbos. So these two things, erev Shabbos and on Shabbos, erev Shabbos is termed shehiyah, means leaving something on the fire. Shabbos, shin hey, yud hey, shehiyah, leaving pots on the fire erev Shabbos into Shabbos. That is one set of halachas. And there's another set of halachas called chazara, returning pots to the fire on Shabbos itself. Shehiyah is erev Shabbos, and chazara, chazayin reish hey, is on Shabbos. Now, in both shehiyah and chazara, if there is no isur min haTorah, these are isurim these are conditions that Chazal set up, or Chachamim set up, to safeguard us from coming to a possibility of bishul on Shabbos, or stoking the fire and turning on the flame on Shabbos. There are many details in this halachas. I'm going to cover the general halachas and some practical shilas associated with them. So starting off with shehiyah, erev Shabbos. So Chachamim were concerned that if one were to leave a pot, min haTorah, if one leaves a pot on the fire right before Shabbos, a minute before Shabbos, you put up your pot of soup or whatever it might be, there's no problems from the Torah itself, because you're not doing any cooking on Shabbos, you're doing it before Shabbos, even though the malacha is happening on Shabbos and on your stovetop. That's not a problem, because we are only concerned about you resting on Shabbos, your animal resting on Shabbos, but your kalim, your property doesn't have to rest on Shabbos. Although your top is working and cooking and doing work on Shabbos, that's okay. You have to make shalamai yanuach sherich abdecha shericha behemtecha. Not quoting verbatim, but you have to make sure that you're resting, your family's resting, and your animal's resting, but you don't have an obligation to make sure that your kalim rest on Shabbos. The Gemara actually discusses that. This is a point of machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai held that there is a concept of shvisas kalim. Shvisas kalim meaning that your kalim have to also rest. You can't have your possessions doing work for you on Shabbos. On the other hand, Beis Hillel disagreed and said that no, there is no isser of shvisas kalim. Your kalim don't have to rest on Shabbos. And that's the halacha, like Beis Hillel, as usually we pass like Beis Hillel on most occasions. So there's no problem in haTorah leaving up your pot on the fire right before Shabbos. However, as we said, Chachamim had various safeguards to keep us from doing the malacha. They were concerned that people leave pots on the fire right before Shabbos. They usually play around with the fire because they stoke the coals in order to have their food ready for their Friday night meal. So you're constantly turning the flame up, turning the flame down, because you want to make sure your food is going to be ready for Shabbos. So this is very instinctive, and it's very easy that one can come to be Orvim and haTorah. So based on what the Torah tells us, Asu Mishmeres and Mishmarti, that the Chachamim should put a safeguard to the Torah, Chachamim forbade putting up foods on Shabbos, erev Shabbos, shehiyah, the Isurei Shehiyah, only under certain conditions do they allow us to put things up on the fire on erev Shabbos. So this is called the concern of the fact that we will stir up the coals, and today turning up the flame, the knob, is called Shema Yichata. Perhaps one will be Mechata, Shema Yichata, he will stir up the coals. Shim Mem Aleph, Yud Ches Tav Hey, Shema Yichata will stir. So, number one, a person can put things on the fire of Shabbos if he has a blech. If one puts up a blech, That's a way where someone makes a recognition for oneself that they will not come to touch the fire. You see your blech there, you already remember it's Shabbos, and you're not going to touch the fire. The second way is where one can have the food halfway cooked. Our Shabbos is called Michael ben Drusai. Michael ben Drusai was the food of a certain robber. The Gemara says that he would eat his food on the go, so he wouldn't eat it fully cooked. He would eat it partially raw. Now that's common for many people to do that. They go to the restaurants and they ask for it to be partially raw. But then in the times of Chazal, that was considered a robber did that. Ben Drusai, he was some individual would do it, so that he had some type of schus that his name is used to describe food which is partially cooked. And if the food is at least partially cooked at a Shabbos, so then you'll be allowed to leave on the fire of Shabbos. Reason being, once it's partially cooked, and we'll discuss exactly the measurements soon, just to give the outline. So once it's partially cooked, Chachamim felt that there was the Alter Rebbe brings down two reasons why we're not concerned anymore for the chash, the concern of Shem Yichata. Number one, the food is halfway cooked, and most probably will be ready for your meal. So you're not as concerned, will it be ready, will not be ready. So you don't have that much of a push to go and play with the fire. We're not again talking about someone who Chas Hashem is doing things b'mezid. Chacham we don't make restrictions for someone who's doing it on purpose. For them, we are v'lorasha lama l'saper chukai. Chacham were for dealing with cases of shoigi. We wanted to safeguard you from coming by accident to coming to an avera. So when someone will have the food partially cooked, they'll feel comfortable that the food will be ready for the meal. Another reason the Alter Rebbe gives is that in certain extreme situations, a person will eat food even though it's not fully cooked, even though it's somewhat raw, it's still edible in certain situations, and therefore, again, a person doesn't have that much of a push to go and instinct to go and play with the fire. We'll discuss a third way how you can leave things in the fire of Shabbos, Mirz Hashem, later on. So let's first discuss these two manners, the blech, and then discuss leaving the food partially cooked. And by the way, these two heterim, to leave things on the fire of Shabbos, are both mutually exclusive. One is not contingent on the other. You don't need both. A common misconception, either one is fine to leave things on the fire of Shabbos. Either a blech or ma'achel l'sai, the food is partially cooked. Now, what does it mean a blech? In the times of the Chachamim, they did not use a blech. They had fire, wood, coals, what they use, the flammable material they used. The way that they did what we do as the blech, they did a little differently. They would either shovel out the coals out of their oven and then seal the food in the oven and keep the heat in there. Or they would sprinkle a layer of ashes, a thin layer of ashes coated over the entire fire. And that was their way of making that recognition to themselves that they should not come to touch the fire on Shabbos, to deal with this kshash Shem Yichad. However, we do find a source for the concept of having a sheet of metal instead of a coating of ash. We use a sheet of metal, or maybe a few layers of silver foil to be in between the pot and the fire. There is sources for this. There's a discussion in the Rishonim about someone who wakes up in the morning and finds that his pot is burning. What should he do? And they say to take a pot, turn over and take an overturned pot, put on the fire, and put your pot on top of that. So that's sort of like your blech. So we find the idea, but that wasn't the common way of doing things. Today, when things change with the way we have gas stoves, electric stoves, and now they're trying to forbid the gas stoves, so things are changing constantly. So things are different, and it's common to use a sheet of metal. Does the sheet of metal need to cover just the fire or also the knobs as well? Most poskim hold it does not need to cover the knobs. Even those that say it should cover the knobs as well, say it as it's better it should cover the knobs, but not that you need to cover the knobs. From the Alter Rebbe himself, there are various. It seems from the Alter Rebbe that it would not need to cover the knobs as well. Remember, they did not have knobs those days, but you can deduce from the Alter Rebbe that it would not need to cover the knobs. So you have today in the stores various types of blechs. You have some blechs that cover the knobs, some blechs that don't cover the knobs. Either one is fine. If it's easy to get one that covers the knobs and it's the same, it's the same price, so you can take it. It's nice. Be mahader. But it's not something one is obligated to do at all, and it's not an issue if you don't have one. And if your husband went and bought the other one, no reason to be upset with him. It's fine, even if it doesn't cover the knobs. It's common for a lot of people try to get one that covers the knobs. It's a nice minig. Everyone agrees you're not chayav to do that. The main thing is to have that recognition between the pot and the flame. That's where you need to have the blach.
It's not meant to just to make it indirect cooking. It's really meant as a sign.
Correct. Correct. The indirect cooking is the sign, but the point is the sign. It's indirect, but the point is the sign. Now, so that is regarding the blech. Now, what about crackpots? In crackpots, you should line it with a layer of silver foil. It doesn't have to be very thick, but just put inside some silver foil inside your crackpot, and you can leave it there every week. You don't have to take it out and take it in. For many years, we used the crackpot in our family. Then we stopped using it for a lot of years. Now we went back to using the crackpot. When I took out the crackpot, I saw the silver foil was still there. It was still fine. As long as the silver foil is complete, it doesn't have holes, and it's just a complete piece of silver foil, you can leave it there the whole time, and that's your blech. It's better to come over the rim slightly over the rim, as you fold it over a little bit, just so you should be able to see it. But again, the main thing is inside.
Does it have to cover the whole inside?
Wherever the heating element is. And if it's a full crack, I think the heating element is all over. So you just have to cover the heating element. That's the thing. The fire in between the pot and the heating element.
That's under the insert, right?
Right. Yeah.
You just cover the knob, but that's also just being happen on the hood.
Again, that would be more mahudr extra. Yeah. Some of us tape lights at Shabbos, right? Or we have now plastic covers, metal covers, right? Some people use scotch tape. Again, you're not high to do that, but that's a nice thing. It's to keep you away from doing an affair. If you feel that sometimes you walk into the room and you turn on a light instinctively, so it's a nice thing to safeguard from doing an affair. So that's regarding the blech. Now, the second idea we mentioned before, the second heter was Michael ben Drusai. Dalad Reish Vav Samach Ayin Yud. Michael ben Drusai, the son of Drusai. So partially cooked food you can leave even without a blech. What does it mean partially cooked? This is a machlokes rishonim between the Rambam and Rashi. It's not only regarding these halachas, it's regarding other aspects of the Torah as well, regarding what constitutes bishul akum, how much did the guy cook it, how much did the yid cook it, and regarding many shilas. When the Chazal talk about this food that's partially cooked, Michael ben Drusai, this food of the son of ben Drusai, how cooked was it? Rashi understands it means it was a third cooked. The Rambam understands it was halfway cooked. And this is a machlokes, it's a famous machlokes, the Rashi and the Rambam. In general, the rule is whenever we're dealing with something, so this machlokes has not been decided, like clearly, do we follow Rashi's opinion, do we follow the Rambam's opinion? A lot of times, things are clearly decided. In this case, there's no clear decision as to what Michael Desai means. So it depends on the case. When it comes to something which is min haTorah, when something min haTorah, we would go more to the stringent side. If it was something midrabanan, we would go to the more lenient side. And we would say, whichever shear is more lenient for that halacha, that's what we would take. Now, these halachas of Shehiyah, Erev Shabbos, leaving upon the fire of Shabbos, as we said before, are from the Chachamim. They're not min haTorah. So seemingly, we should be lenient, and we should follow the opinion of Rashi, that a third cooked alone is enough. So Erev Shabbos, if you put up your cholent, your soup, your chicken, and it's third way cooked, that's fine. That should be good enough, because again, we're dealing with something which is midrabanan, and we can be lenient and follow Rashi's opinion. However, Lamaisa, the Poskim do not take that path, and they clearly say, although that's the general rule, since Shabbos is very strict, the halachas of Shabbos are very severe, it's important for us to be cautious for the opinion of the Rambam that it should be halfway cooked. And that's why we, l'chatchila, we leave things on the fire in a manner that they will be halfway cooked. Let's say the food takes 2 hours to cook. You put it up 1 hour before Shabbos at least. However, b'diavad, if one did not do that, and they put it up at a later point, we do rely on the opinion of Rashi that a third cooked is fine. It's not only if you did it and you didn't know, but it's even in cases where you l'chatchila don't have time. If you had a busy Friday and you came home late, or you were traveling and you went upstate and you came up there and it was late, you don't have a blech available, or you don't want to use a blech for some reason. So then you could say, I want to rely on a third cooked. So l'chatchila we aim for halfway cooked, and if we can't, we rely on the food being a third cooked.
So if there's a black and doesn't have to be cooked at all?
Yes.
Oh.
Before everything we're discussing before Shabbos. On Shabbos, when we return it, obviously it has to be cooked.
We don't use a black. I'm saying everybody uses a black. We don't use it before cooked. Is that just like, is it a minhag or is it just?
Women like to do that just to have everything ready and
Okay, but really, if the food is fully cooked, you could leave it on a fire without a black.
correct, and even halfway cooked.
Uh-huh. Because you said they're not mutually exclusive. They are mutually exclusive, so they would have
Exactly.
done that. Oh.
Right, each one is
Yeah,
separate.
well-
There is no inference in the poskim that you should do both. Some people do both. It's based on a Rav who lived here in the Lower East Side in the earlier years. It was a big Rav, Rabbi Henkin, and he had like a famous calendar, and he wrote some halachas in his calendar, and he had written like it's better to do this because people sometimes in the blech they move the pot a little bit, like to position it properly in the fire, so you might come back later and position it, move it, and it's not fully cooked. You'll come to cooking on Shabbos. That's his ism and atayr. Now, although that's praiseworthy, but that's not brought down in halacha anywhere that one needs to do that. So he doesn't claim that it's in halacha, just saying that's what's better to do because it's sort of like taping your lights on Erev Shabbos. There's no obligation at all to tape your lights on Erev Shabbos. Someone who does that have to be extra careful. So those people that do that, they want to be comfortable, feel comfortable, they do it. But we have to remember in a shir, we have to try to bring out what's the ikar halacha and what's praiseworthy, what's feelings. Not everything is halacha. Some of it's our hergish, our feeling. So from a halachic perspective, it does not say in the Alter Rebbe, nor does it say in the Mishnah Berurah, any paskin that one needs to have both together.
So if something is half cooked and it's on the black before Shabbos, but it's not like directly on the black part that's on top of the thing that's on, you can't move it on Shabbos.
No, because then you're going to have an issue in HaTorah because you're cooking.
Right.
Oh, if it's fully cooked, but if it's not fully cooked,
So you cannot touch it at all, just leave it.
till it's fully cooked.
Till
It's fully cooked, you can
Right, into certain areas, not everywhere, but in the area where it's like if it's partially on the fire.
Is there a reason why if something's warm and it's not warm to your liking, you can put it back? So that applies?
So
for
let's
taking off the
discuss. So let's leave the shaila for later about putting it back to the fire. So the chazara. Let's finish up with Erev Shabbos. Let's divide it, and then we'll get to chazara on Shabbos.
Can I ask a question about the pot? So the challenge, I can put any level of cooked challenge if I have the foil underneath.
Yes.
So I can make it, whether or not it has meat, I thought it has to be like raw meat and can get it for Shabbos.
What we do is basically what people tend to do is put these three. We're going to discuss the third heter, which you're starting to mention some of it about the meat. So they're putting it all we're making a chalent out of the chalent. So we're putting all the three together. They're all three separate heterim.
It could be either one. So either use raw meat or have
Exactly.
have a piece of foil or have it half.
Right. I didn't yet discuss the raw meat, but yes.
And then just one question on something that you just said, but we first said we don't want to make these generalizations. I think you were saying how you don't want to go into it having that intention.
For which situation regarding
For putting things
halfway cooked?
Yeah.
So that's a l'chatchila b'diavad situation. We sometimes like the halacha should say aser mutter, but there's
right. There's
sometimes
you already did it.
Complexity. So again, as we explained, since we have a machlokes Rashi and the Rambam, what it constitutes ma'ichem d'soy, and Rashi and many paskim hold that it's a third way cooked. The Rambam held halfway cooked. Normally, in all dinim of the Rabbanan, we would just say, let's follow Rashi, it's a third cooked. Dinim Misham and Atayra, I would say, if this would be a Menatayra din, I would say go to halfway cooked, because we have to go to the stringent side. Even in this case, even though it's the Rabbanan, we're still machmir, but we're only machmir l'chatchila. So the chatchila, we're machmir to the stringent shear, we put it up if it's halfway cooked. However, if you didn't, and you didn't realize, you put it up, it was a third cooked. It was lower than half cooked. Or if, again, you have a shas chak, you have a situation where you're late and you weren't able to do it, so you could also rely that it's a third way cook. So what you're doing every Shabbos is 50% cook. Once in a year, once a year, you're having certain situations that come up, and you're gonna use that third way cook, and that's perfectly fine.
Even if you have like the intention on the way home, and you know you literally only have time to like put it on for.
Yeah, if it's a third way cooked, it's mutter without a blech. Now, the reason most of us use a blech is because it makes the most sense. Why? Why do I have to think about how cooked it is, how not cooked it is? Let me just put up a blech and finish with the whole story. And also, we're going to talk about this later when it comes to the dinim of putting back things on the fire. You have to have a blech. You can't put things back without a blech. So if you're planning on putting something back on the fire on Shabbos, taking it off and putting it on, you're going to have a blech. So that's not optional. When it comes to halachas shehiyah, blech is optional, and you could do ma'achin b'soi or blech, or the third option about the raw meat, which we'll discuss. On Shabbos, a blech is not going to be optional. So therefore, many people just feel like, let me just have a blech, and I don't have to think about it. But it's important to know the halachas that you don't need to have a blech, and if you don't want a blech, or you don't have a blech, you don't need a blech, you can put things up ma'achin b'soi. And again, l'chatchila, halfway cooked, and b'di'evid situations, a third way cooked is also fine.
With the pot pot, sometimes when I take out the insert, the foil sticks to the pot and it comes out, kind of like, and then it's hard for me to take it out while I'm holding onto the crock pot to put the foil back in.
I don't have this problem. So I think either adjust it or find a different company. Silver foil, see, I'm not sure, maybe the crock pot, the way it's set up. Maybe it's too tight. It doesn't have to be that snug. It just doesn't have to be very thick. Just it's a hecker. It's just to recognize that you should do it. You see the silver foil there, it makes you recognize it's Shabbos. Remember, it's Shabbos. You don't have to have a very thick silver foil. Take maybe a thinner company, or maybe a thicker company will help you, that it won't flap around and play around with it a little.
Creates the situation of Yatza, the whole gradient, Yatza display, not Yatza display.
And that's on Shabbos. We didn't yet discuss it. On Shabbos. Now, same thing with the oven. Yes, if you want to leave chicken in the oven erev Shabbos, potatoes, chicken, rice, and it's only, as long as it's halfway cooked, but the ever the third cooked, you're fine. There's no real way to make a blech inside the oven, so we just have this option. This is the option you have of having it halfway cooked before Shabbos.
Meat which may be received, but some people would eat to that extent. I was wondering, like, how do you determine what's the cause like a seed?
And what type of meat?
Like a
sear.
The sear. You're saying you sear just the outside.
Yeah.
And the whole inside is raw.
Yeah.
Is that's the way it's served? That's the dish, or is that?
Some people might eat it instead. Well, but I'm not. Like, what is that? What is that?
So let's go with what the place can say, halfway cooked. In this case, I can't say it's halfway cooked, so you need to cook it more.
Then I just have to like stop like 1 hour earlier.
Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
Maybe you want to open the oven door and see if you do it in the oven, you open the oven door and then you still want to close the oven door.
If it's not fully cooked, no. If it's not
edible.
fully cooked, then you're helping the cooking process by closing it. You'd be able to leave it open, but you wouldn't be able to close it. So you only can open the oven or the lid of the pot, like we said last week, the lid of the pot, only when you know it's fully cooked. Otherwise, you're going to have an issue. You're not going to be able to close it. Good question. So anything which does not have dials, and there's no way that there's no temperatures set it to, so there's no chash, this concern, a shami yichata, perhaps you will play with the fire. There's no ability to play with the fire. So a lot of the urns they have one setting. It's a plug in, plug out, or on and off. Whether a hot plate or urn, those things do not need a blech or don't only be halfway cooked. All the dinim of shehiyah of erev Shabbos, again, only erev. All the dinim that we're discussing on erev Shabbos do not apply. She do not apply to anything which doesn't have dials.
It does have a reboil.
Reboil is not an issue because Chachamim were never concerned if something is already cooked and hot that you will bring it to a higher temperature. Maybe someone will do that, but that wasn't the chash of Chachamim. The Chachamim were concerned that your food is not going to be ready for the meal, and then you're going to feel the urge to touch the play with the fire like we do. But if something's already fully cooked, it's just a matter of reboiling it and making it much really hot. That wouldn't fall into the chashash of chacham. So you can put up those water urns right before Shabbos without any concern about anything we discussed in the shiur. However, if you have a low, medium, high, and things like that, then that's an issue. And you would need to follow either blech or ma'ichem and dusay.
What about soup that's cold? Fully cooked, but cold.
An old question I have.
You say someone wouldn't drink it cold?
Let me get back to you on it, but I think it's mutter, but I'm pretty sure it's mutter. But let me get back to that question. So we don't treat water that way. Yeah. Yeah, we don't treat water that way. Now, there is a third method we did not discuss yet, a third heter erev Shabbos. This is more complicated, so it's not usually done, and that is the raw meat heter. Right. So how does that heter work? Let's understand it. In the times of Chachamim said that if you put up raw meat erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos, you put raw meat. You're cooking raw meat, or you have a pot of something else, and you throw in a piece of raw meat right before Shabbos. You don't need to have a blech, and you don't need to have it fully cooked. It's raw. It doesn't have to be fully cooked. What's the reason behind this heter? The reason is because raw meat meat is tough, and raw meat will take a longer time to cook. Now, so therefore, it will not be ready for your Friday night meal anyways. Since it won't be ready for your Friday night meal anyways, you're not going to come to stoke the fire, to play with the fire, to have it ready. It's not going to be ready anyway. So obviously, you're putting it up for the day meal, for the next morning. If you're putting it up for the next morning, it will be ready anyways the next morning. So it's called a mimanashach. Either way, you're good. Friday night, you don't have the urge. It's not a problem. You don't need it for Friday night because it's not going to be ready. It's only be ready in the middle of the night. And the next day, it will anyways be ready. So we're not concerned, at least in most cases, we're not concerned that there'll be an issue. Chacham did not make such any distinction about this issue. Therefore, it's mutter to put up raw meat, or even throw in one piece of raw meat into a pot of vegetables right before Shabbos. This only applies right before Shabbos, because if it would be earlier, it wouldn't be raw anymore. The issue with this is that today things are different. And post World War II, and our fires, our gas stoves, and that they do cook the raw meat, and it can be ready for the meal. Why it wasn't ready then, I don't know. I don't really understand why the fires weren't able to get ready for the night meal. Maybe they made early Shabbos, and I'm not really sure. But the Poiske, the Poiskim of our times have pointed out this heter cannot be used anymore in a regular oven or stovetop. However, it still applies with slow cookers. If you're using a slow cooker, a crackpot, another form of slow cooker, yes, it will not be ready until the middle of the night. Your cholent will not be ready until the middle of the night. So you won't have that urge, instinctive urge to touch the dials and say, oh, I'll put it on high and it'll be ready, because even putting on a high, it won't be ready. And you don't need it for the night meal, you need it for the day meal. And by then, the cholent will for sure be ready. It will be a question, the opposite question, if that might be getting burned. But you don't have any shaila of shema yichata, you might come to stoke the fire.
But you could already put it up raw because you have a foil, right?
So I'm talking about a case where you wouldn't have a foil, because remember, all these three are independent to Torah.
You didn't have a foil.
Right. So I know someone who does this. They like to put up the challenge last minute. They're always last minute people, so they like to put it up. He'll put it up right before Shabbos the challenge, and I don't know if he has a silver foil or not, but he doesn't need the silver foil if he did have it. Again, for Shehiyah, Chazar, you would need it, but for Erev Shabbos, blech is optional. You have three options, three heter. So if you want to take the raw meat option, Just if you're making a fleishik challen, just put it up by lichbenchen time. Put it up. It's going to still be raw before Shabbos. Maybe the water will start warming up a little bit, but it won't even be hot. The water. It's a whole big pot. It's not going to be hot at all. The meat's not going to be cooked. You'll put it up a half hour before Shabbos, 20 minutes before Shabbos. Your meat's not going to be hot, starting to cook. So it will still be raw. As long as when Shkia comes, sunset comes, and your meat is still raw, it's not been cooked at all, it's purely raw, you have this heter of raw meat. So again, this one requires 3 conditions: raw meat, slow cooker, and right before Shabbos. If you do this earlier in the day, yeah, your food can be ready for the night meal. So you get into the chashash, maybe you'll turn it from low to medium to high. So since this is has a few conditions to it, it's not easy to implement. It's only crackpots, it's only with fleishik challen, and it's only right before Shabbos. It's not advisable to take this route, but it is good to know this, that it is a heter, and there's no difference between this and the other ones. They're all legitimate heterim. And in case of a need, where you can't even have it a third way cooked before Shabbos, and you're doing the fleishik challen, you don't have a blech, this is 100% permissible in the slow cooker. Shehiyah means when you put things up, are the set of halachas pertaining to leaving things on the fire erev Shabbos. Shehiyah means waiting and leaving it on the fire erev Shabbos. Second set of halachas is chazara, returning the pots to the fire on Shabbos. There's separate halachas. Yes, it will be an issue. We didn't yet discuss it yet, but I'm just pointing it out. By Shehiyah, you have 3 options, and they're all independent. By Chazara, you're going to have a blech. So that's another incentive for us to always use a blech. If you don't have a blech, if you don't have a blech, if you could put the blech on, you could pull it out from your drawer and put it on. It's fine. But if you don't have a blech on the fire, it's going to be a problem. If you don't have a blech, you could always take a frying pan and turn it over. Right. If you're using a crack pot, you would need the lining. Correct. Yes. Yes. It's not muksa the blech. You can put on Shabbos.
So let's say I take out the insert and then some foil got stuck. I can have foil. I could add new foil and put it in.
Yes. Not a problem. Yes. Wherever there's a heating element. Wherever there's a heating element, and again, like we said before, you can just put it snug in and leave it there. You don't have to ever take it out. Unless it starts to rip and things like that, you'll have to put a new, but you can just leave it there always. This is all Shehiyah.
Shehiyah, taking off a Shabbos morning and putting it back?
That's Chazara.
Oh, okay, I thought that was what the question was.
Right. She started to bring it up, but that's Chazara. Okay, so.
To that question for next time about a fully cooked soup that's cold. We add any fully cooked dish, chicken or cocoa that's fully cooked, or you're just putting it right before.
I don't think it should be a problem, but I'm just going to confirm with you. I don't think it's a problem. The what?
Right.
Similar, right? Yeah. Similar question.
But didn't we say last time that if it's fully cooked in the fridge, you could directly put it onto a blech on Shabbos anyways?
Oh, if you have a blech, there's no issue. If there's no blech, there's no issue. They're asking if the question is if this direct fire, does this constitute ma'achel ben dusai when it's not hot anymore. It's fully cooked.
But
I think it does,
like
and I just want to confirm with you.
Directly on fire. Blech is totally fine. Okay.
A bag under the shelf? No, the bag is not a blech. Oh, the silver foil could be in between the bag and if you want to do it that way, yeah. If you do the second bag, second plastic bag, and 2 plastic bags, and that second bag would be considered your blech. I don't know. I'm not aware. There's no different set of halachas here. In fact, in this case, the Velt's a little bit more machmer with these dinim. The Alter Rebbe is more meko. So we're a little more lenient. They put it up maybe 3 hours before Shabbos, or maybe they do a fully cooked before Shabbos. then they'll have that issue putting it back. Yeah. Again, it's not a hot plate. Only a pot that has only a cooker that has dial has low, medium, high. If it's just an on and off or plug in, plug out, you don't need a blech. Even on Shabbos, returning on Shabbos also not need a blech because there's no way to change the dial. There's no way to change the temperature, so you wouldn't need a blech. No. Unless some want to say if there's certain settings you put like a lock setting on it, like you lock it, that maybe that be constitutes as like a blech because I have to, in order to get to it, I have to put in a code or undo the lock setting and then it will remind me. So if you have no choice, you can use that.
A not fully cooked shell end has a different status when it comes to the question of Hazara later on. If it went into Shabbat without being fully cooked, it actually
No?
the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a hot plate without dials, like.
Correct. You don't need a blech. Don't need a blech. Anything that regarding blech, it does not need a blech. You still need other conditions when it comes to chazara, returning on fire on Shabbos, like we're going to say now. But anything that regarding the condition of having a blech, if there's no way to turn up the dials, there's no dials, then there's no concern at all. Chacham's concern does not apply. There are certain paiskim, Litvish paiskim, that are machmer in certain cases with this thing, shaila, but it's not something we have to be machmer. They'll say if something is very similar to other devices that do have it, then you shouldn't use that one because maybe you'll come to use that one. Not all, just certain Litvish paiskim held that way. But that's not something that we have to be concerned with. Now, just on a side note, mentioning Litvish paiskim, there is a very good sefer written by a Litvish paisik on Hilchos Shabbos, the Lametes Malachas set, the 4 books. It's a really excellent set.
Does it have all this?
All these discussions are there, although it's not based on the Alter Rebbe, although they will sometimes bring the Alter Rebbe's psak. It's based on the Mishabura, Moshe Feinstein. Most of the time, it does coincide with our psak, but not all the time. But it definitely explains things beautifully, and it gives nice diagrams, and it's very, very, very good, excellent sefer. If you want, they have actually in the Chayenus for a number of years they were
Doing Shabbos halachas.
Right. Those Shabbos halachas were based on that sefer. They got permission from that sefer, and they would change things according to the Alter Rebbe's psak. But it's never been published. I think the author didn't want it to be published formally. Didn't give a shus to publish it separate. Pamphlet he gave a shus for it to be published in the Chayenu and modifying it according to the Alter Rebbe's psak, that sefer. In English by Rabbi David Ribiat.
Oh, this is it, right?
Exactly, yes. It's a 4 set. It's a little expensive. I don't know if they have a Heyteva sale. It's an excellent set in English and all the Lametes Malachas. It's really good. It gives you a lot of background to all the halachas, practical. And even in cases when we don't know exactly what the Alter Rebbe said, it's fine. You can rely on these svarim. They're very authoritative svarim. If you know what the Alter Rebbe says, obviously you'll follow the Alter Rebbe's psak. But in case you're not sure, you don't know, you don't have time in your home and you can look something up, you can look it up and follow what it says in such type of words. There's no telling. Every case is different. What every pasuk says. In this case, the Alter Rebbe felt this way. In this case, this way. It could be lenient, more strict. There's no way to know.
He said it was more strict than official.
Right, but in this case, it happens to be a few cases here that we're mentioning. Was more lenient in certain things that they do in the.
Will this one be just as good, like the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch?
So that's the Alter Rebbe itself. That's the Alter Rebbe himself, but that's not as easy to learn. That's much more intense. Learning the Alter Rebbe himself as well. Application, right? Lametes Malachas is a practical guide to halachas. There are many books out there in Shabbos, right? You have Shabbos in the Kitchen works from maybe Feldheim and Art Schools, but there's plenty of good quality books out there. I think that Lametes Malachas probably is the best, but there's a lot of quality books out there on these halachas. The Alter Rebbe is good to learn, but it's not going to be easy applying.
Even though this volume is specifically on the 39 halachas.
It's not going to be easy. The Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch is spread all around, and
right. It's not
I'm not going to discourage anyone to learn the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. You should learn it, but if you need to know halacha l'maisa, you're not going to be able to open up the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and figure it out.
Right.
Over here, you could take it. You could look up that malacha or look up the index. They have a very good index, and you could find what you need. Now, okay, so these are all the dinim of shehiyah. Just to recap, we have 3 independent heterim to leave things on the fire of Shabbos for what's called shehiyah. One is that we should have a blech. Number 2, Michael, the food is cooked, Michael ben to soy. Halfway cooked, l'chatchila, but the have it a third way cooked. And the third thing is using raw meat in a slow cooker and right before Shabbos. You can put it up before Shabbos early enough, as long as the food will not start to get cooked. The meat will not start to cook before Shabbos. So if it takes 20 minutes for the pot to start becoming hot, 30 minutes for the pot to start getting hot. Once it starts getting hot, your meat will start to cook very gradually, but a little bit. So it still needs to be raw. So whatever point it will still be considered raw, your cholent, you can put it up that point for Shabbos, after that point.
I have a question about that again. I'm gonna use a foil, like a black and white kind. So my kids like to chill on Friday night. If I take it out and it's not fully done, so I could put it in any time, I could put it in, and I put it back after, if I open it and it's not.
If it's not fully cooked, you can't put it back. You can only take it off the fire when the food is fully cooked.
Okay. I have to, like,
Judge is through the glass.
Okay, so let's go to now. This everyone is leading. The questions are all leading us to the next half of the shir, which is dinim of chazara, returning the pot to the fire on Shabbos. So after you dealt with your shehiyah, your pot's on the fire, you worked it out based on one of these 3 methods. Now it's Shabbos day, let's say, or late Shabbos Friday night. Your food is fully cooked. Step 1, fully cooked, and you took it off, and now you want to put it back on the fire. You are allowed to put it back on the fire. That is called chazara, returning the pot. Chazara, returning the pot to the fire. You're allowed to do it if it's fully cooked under certain conditions. Fully cooked is not even a condition. That's like obvious. It has to be fully cooked. Otherwise, you're going to be over an isser min hatayr of cooking on Shabbos. That's not a problem, as long as it's fully cooked. Oh, so you can put it in a cup and take it out.
And then you can't close it.
Yeah, you can't close it, right? So you're gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to wait till it fully cooked. Yeah, true. Good points. Now, so there are a number of conditions when you can return the pot to the fire on Shabbos. So let's put it all together as let's say it as 5 conditions. Number 1, the vushel. 6 conditions. I'm sorry, 6 conditions. Number 1, you want to have it fully cooked, like we just said, fully cooked. This is just obvious, but I'm making it as one of the conditions. It's not actually a condition, a chazara. It's really to do with cooking on Shabbos. It's actually what we learned last week. All that cooking on Shabbos. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So obviously, you can't put something in the fire. Not allowed to cook on Shabbos. That's cooking. I'm putting food, raw food on the. That was really last week's shir. But we're just going to put it to make it simpler. You have to make sure your food is fully cooked when you want to if you took it off, now you want to put it back. So you make sure it's fully cooked. So once it's fully cooked, there is still a set of conditions that we need. And we're going to go through them now, discuss each one of them. And the step number 1, and we'll discuss the reasons behind it. This is the first thing you need to have. You need to have a blech. It's not optional, as with shehiyah. We had 3 options. Over here, the blech is not optional. You have to have a blech. And again, in cases where there are no dials, there's no way to modify the temperature, that is already a blech built in. You don't need a blech. But in cases where there are dials, you can change the temperature, you need to have a blech. And you can put the blech on later on Shabbos.
Upside down,
whatever it might be, you can pull out a blech out of your drawer, your closet, not a problem, but you cannot return it to the fire without a blech. So it needs to be fully cooked, number 1. Number 2, you need to make sure you have a blech. What's the reason why we need to have a blech? Reason, the same reason why shehiyah you need to have a blech. Because of the concern, shemi yichata. Maybe when you will return the pot to the fire, you will start playing with the fire. In those days, it meant you'll take your stick and you will stoke the coals, shovel the coals, moving them around, stir them up to get the fire going. These days it means pushing your button and then turning your knob. And therefore you need to have a blech. Now, why at Shabbos we have the same exact concern by Shehiyah, and we still say you don't need to have a blech. And if it's halfway cooked, it's fine. Well, over here it's fully cooked because it has to be fully cooked. So why are we still concerned with this concern? So why do we need a blech? So the Alter Rebbe's understanding is, and this is a point of difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Mishnah Berurah, the Alter Rebbe understands that the reasoning why Chazal required a blech for Chazara was because of the same reason Erev Shabbos, but Chazal were more stringent with this concern on Shabbos itself. Because once you leave a pot on the fire Erev Shabbos, I left it there, now I leave the kitchen. I'm going to read a book, I'm going to daven, I'm going to be with my children. So they weren't as concerned with the fact that you're going to come back to the fire to play with it. And therefore they said, if it's halfway cooked, you don't need to have a blech. However, on Shabbos itself, you're now coming, you're taking a shalom pot or your soup pot, whatever it might be, and you're coming and you're going back to the fire and why are you putting it back in the fire? Because you want to make sure it's hot. So they were much more concerned with this very same concern of Erev Shabbos, but Chazal were much more strict with this concern of Shema Yichata, maybe you will turn up the flame, and therefore they said you have to have a blech on Shabbos. So no one argues that you must have a blech on Shabbos. That's clear that Chazal required that. The question is the reasoning behind it. Alter Rebbe understand the same reasoning as Erev Shabbos, but it's much more stricter Erev Shabbos. It's much stronger concern on Shabbos. Therefore, even though the food is fully cooked, we're still going to want you to have a blech. You need to have both together, fully cooked and blech on returning on Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah understands no. The reason why it's an issue on Shabbos and you have to have a blech is not for this concern because we really dealt with it. It's fully cooked, the food. The problem with returning it to the fire is it seems like you're cooking. It seems like you're cooking. We want to do it indirect. By putting the blech, it makes it more of an indirect way of cooking because no one cooks typically with a sheet of metal in between the fire and the pot. And that's the reason why Chachamim required a blech. Whatever way we understand it, this is the second condition that you have to have a blech when you want to return things to the fire on Shabbos. Third condition, I should say. Oida biyade. Oida biyade means oida is ayin vav dalad hey. Biyade beis yud dalad vav. Oida biyade. It's still in your hand. You have to hold the pot when you take it off and take out the food and you put it back. You're holding it the whole time. You shouldn't let it go. And we'll discuss the reason behind this soon. And the fourth condition is that one should have daite lahachziroi. You have in mind to put it back on the fire. You took it off on condition, and I'm going to return it. I don't have to say it verbally, but in my mind, I know I'm taking it off, but I know I'm going to have guests coming later, family members going to come later. I want to put it back. So you had in mind. So you had the first one was oida. The third condition was oida biyade. It's still in your hand. Fourth one is daite lahachziroi. You had in mind to put it back. Let's go through all the conditions, and then we'll go back and discuss each one in detail. The next condition is, the fifth condition, cham k'tzas, it should still be warm. When you want to put it back on the fire, the food in your pot should still be warm. It didn't cool off yet. Usually it's warm and hot. It's not a problem, but let's say it was like a small pot or some schnitzels or something, and it cooled off. Even though you have a blech, even though you had a mind to put it back, and you're still holding onto the tray, it would be a problem to put it back on the fire if it cooled off. If it's still warm, even though it's not yatzei lavzbay, as long as it's warm, edible warm, you can. It's okay. And this is not about cooking on Shabbos. This is about even if the food is completely dry, like a schnitzel is completely dry, or a challah ein bishul acha bishul b'davar yavish, like we said last week. This is a separate condition. This is a condition for chazara, even something dry, in order for it to constitute as returning. If something cooled off totally, we don't look at that as returning. We look at it like taking something out of your fridge that's not been on the fire Shabbos.
Right. The schnitzel is fine. It's not a question of there.
No, it's not a question of bishul. But for chazara, you would need to, if you took it off out of the oven, let's say it was in the oven, and you took it out of the oven, you want to return to the oven. You need to make sure that you held on to the tray, and or held on to the food or the tray, and then you had a mind to put it back, and make sure that it didn't cool off. It's not cold. As long as it's still warm, you can put it back in the oven.
What if it did cool off and then you can use the shalach like last week?
No.
You have to invert it.
Last year was all about cooking on Shabbos. This week is not
Right.
about cooking. It's about
Oh, this is about returning. to
various safeguards that Chachamim put to keep us from coming to either making a fire on Shabbos, bringing it a higher flame, or coming to cook on Shabbos, but not actual cooking. So in this case, the schnitzel is fully cooked. There is no problem with cooking. However, Chachamim still did not say I'm allowed to take schnitzel out of my refrigerator and put it directly on the blech. Again, we're not talking about on top of a cholent pot, on top of a soup pot. That's different. Warm up chalas. We're going to talk about that more when you're doing it next to the fire. We're talking about putting directly on the fire. Even when there's a blech, we have conditions. Holding on to it, having in mind. You can't just pull something out and put it directly on the fire.
So we're not talking about the inverted foil, and that's already safeguard, like in the inverted.
Let's talk about practical case. You have on your stove top, you have a blech, and you remove a schnitzel, a tray of, you don't usually keep it there, but let's say you had some schnitzels there or something. Let's say it's in the oven. In the oven, you had a tray of schnitzel, and you took it out, a large tray, and you had it. And now and you know you're having guests coming later in the meal. So there's guests now, there's guests coming later. You still want it to be hot for them, so you can open the oven. Again, we don't leave your oven. You hopefully have a Shabbos mode, or you're opening it in a manner that it's not going to cause anything to change. And open it quickly and close it. You're not going to change the thermostat automatically. So you take it out, you hold on to the tray, and you serve. You take out whatever you need from it, and then you can put it back. What happens if you held on to that tray and you're walking around a whole table and giving everyone schnitzels, and by the time you came back to the oven, your schnitzel are totally cold? This probably won't be, but let's say it is theoretically cold, you would not be allowed to put it back into the fire and into the oven. It's fully cooked. You're right, it's fully cooked. And there's no problem, Bishul. There's a problem, you're missing the condition of chazara. The fifth condition of chazara, this is my way of organizing. It's not, I'm just numbering it my own way. The fifth way is, it has to be cham k'tzas, it has to be slightly warm. Now, I'll give you the sixth condition, and then we'll discuss the reason for these conditions, and maybe that will help you understand what's happening. The sixth condition is, you're not allowed to return it to the fire in a different pan or pot that originally was in. Right? Let's say your cholent was burning and you want to flip it to a different pot. You're going to have a problem. Because you have to keep it in the original pot that it was in. You can't put a new pot. You can't take the schnitzels and put them out in a smaller tray, flip them to a smaller tray and say, oh, I held on to it the whole time and I'm just going to flip into a new tray. I have all the conditions. I have a blech. I'm holding on. It's fully cooked. I have a blech. It's in my hand. I'm holding on the tray. I have a mind to return it. And it's warm. But what did I do? I flipped it into another pan, another tray. And I want to put that new pan, that new tray, the new pot into the oven or on top of the oven. That's a problem. So those are the six conditions of Tanoi, called Tanoi Chazara, conditions of Chazara. Now, what's the reasoning behind it? So we discussed the first one. The first one we all understand it's because it has to be fully cooked. That's a bishul problem. You're over an issa min haTorah. Second condition we explained why it has to have a blech. Why it has to blech, according to the Alter Rebbe's understanding, it needs to have a blech because we're concerned that you might touch the flame, and the blech keeps us away from playing around with the fire. That's our way of remembering. We have to wrap up the shir. However, what's the reason for all these other conditions? The other four conditions that you have to hold in your hand. That is that you have the mind to return it. Cham tzas, it should be warm. You shouldn't return it to another pot. What's the problem? I mean, what's the issue? What is this additional issue? So there is another issue here. There's an issue called nira kimavashal. Nira means seems. Nun reish ayin hey kimavashal chaf mem vei shin lamed. It seems like you're cooking. This means that you're not allowed to do. Chazal did not want us to do things that seem like cooking on Shabbos. it gets us comfortable with cooking on Shabbos. Other people see us doing it. We feel comfortable cooking on Shabbos. So Chacham are very strict with these halachas. There are many detailed halachas. It's probably a Kabbalah. There's deep secrets behind these halachas. But we find myriads of detailed halachas regarding these dinim. So the dinim Chazara, all these other conditions are one reason. Chazal did not want it should seem like you're cooking. So therefore, if I do it in a manner that it's just a continuation of my original process of Shabbos, my original cooking, so I'm not doing any new cooking here on Shabbos. I'm holding it in my hand. I had a mind to return it. It's still warm. It's in the original pot that I put it there. I have all those conditions. It makes it seem that it's just a chazara, a returning of the same pot. It's not something new that I'm doing here. Oh, you're not doing something new. It's not like you went to your refrigerator, your cupboard, and pulled something out and put it directly in the fire. That seems like you're cooking on Shabbos. Although there is no cooking min haTorah, because that item is dry and it's fully cooked. However, Chacham did not want us putting things on the fire that were not originally there. If it was there on the fire when Erev Shabbos came in, and I'm just returning it to the fire, that's okay. If it's made in a manner of chazara, returning, what constitutes returning? I have these conditions. I held on to it. I had in mind. Now, there's a lot more to discuss here, but just a little bit briefly. What does it mean holding on to it in my hands? You don't need to hold it on in the air. You could put it on down on the table or the counter and hold your hand on it. There are certain poskim that do hold. You should hold it in the air. It's not necessary. The minig wasn't that way always. You can put it on the table and hold your hand on it. I wouldn't suggest you doing it in the air, huh? No, that's a certain posik held that way, and he is a posik, but that's not the common understanding that you have to do it that way. And that wasn't a minig. I would not suggest these types of balancing acts at home, and some accident would happen, and the mother's trying to give challenge for the children. This is many poskim hold this way. It's not an issue. I personally heard from Rabbi Heller many years ago that was always the minig, that you just hold it on your hand on the counter, and that is considered holding your hand. The other side of the coin is saying that means holding. Chazal meant to put it on a table. That's not holding. You're placing your hand. Your hand is just sitting on it. The counter and the table is holding up your pot.
Right.
So how do you understand this halacha? I've written about this extensively, and you can be mekel and put it on the table and hold your hand on it. That's fine.
Holding means like a grip or just touch? It should be like you're holding onto the handle.
Touching is already going to be a problem. And then you're going to move your hand away for a second. You want to hold on to the handle. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be a tight grip. As long as if your hand is still touching it, it'll be okay. But I'm just saying.
Switch hands.
Yeah, switching hand is fine.
One hand.
And you can give it to another hand, to someone else to hold and put it to hand, right?
As long as they have to have in mind.
Yeah.
You have to have in mind the whole time, like not being
You don't have to think about it the whole time. Just when you removed it, you're right.
So just to finish your schnitzel example, it's cold, it's in your hands. You can't put it back in the oven because now it's cold, and that uses that category. But you could still do like last week, put it on top of another.
Correct. Because those cases are not near the kinavashal.
Right.
Why are we allowed to put schnitzels that take it out of the fridge, anything dry or a challah out of the freezer? Why are we allowed to put on top of the crack pot or on top of the soup pot or on the side of the fire?
With yatzah,
Even if the yatzah, that is why you can put it there. It's cold, and there you don't have any conditions of chazara. All the conditions we mentioned disappear. Reason being, except for one that has to be fully cooked. That's, like we said, is not really a condition of chazara. I'm just wording as number one. It's very important. But the reason for that is that, again, all the Tanai chazara, the conditions are here. It shouldn't seem like you're cooking. It does not seem like you're cooking when you put something on top of. That's not the normal thing to do at all. It's very abnormal. Putting things on top and on the side. No chef would do that.
Right.
So therefore, that is okay. You don't need any of these conditions. Again, besides for condition number one, that has to be fully cooked and dry, right? But that's not really a chazara condition. That's really a bishul condition.
Right.
So as long as then you don't need conditions of chazara only to allow you to put something directly on the heating element. If I want to put it back into the crack pot, I want to put it on the blech in the spot where the fire is. That's when I need all these conditions. Okay.
I used to think you were allowed to put schnitzel on the blech but directly over the fire, but that's a different condition, like we learned last week. Different set of conditions, right? Even though it's a davar yavesh.
Right, only on the side or on top of another. What you could do if you don't have a food on the fire, what you can do is you can flip over a pan, like we spoke, silver foil pan or a frying pan, flip it over on top of the blech on that area, and then you can put it back. Let's say, just to finish off, we cannot keep everyone waiting. If we can continue some of these things next week, and we'll talk about other halachas like boirer and teichin, cutting up your vegetables and your salads next year. What happens if you miss some of these conditions? By accident, you let go of it. Or not even by accident, you didn't think you were going to have any guests coming. And suddenly someone comes in or someone says they're going to be coming over soon. You think, oh, someone's coming, you forgot. So your challah is now sitting on the counter. It's still hot, it's very hot, but you want it to stay hot and be hot for another hour or two. But you lost your conditions. It's not chazar anymore. You let go of it. You didn't have in mind any one of these that you've lost. You don't have that condition. Your eitzah is to take a frying pan and turn it over, or a pot and turn it over and put it back on top of that blech. Because it's not putting it directly on the blech. Then it's okay to do that. Or put it on the side.
But that can be directly on the fire.
Better not to. If you have no choice, yes, but better to put it on the blech, double blech and this pot on top. If you're not able to do that, or it won't be warm, it won't be hot anymore, you can rely on doing it the flame itself. Move the blech away and take a pan and flip it over and put it directly in the pan. But better to, what would be definitely according to all opinions, would be to have a double method. Blech, and on top of that area where the fire is, to put out some type of pan or pot, flip it over, and then you have and that will be where you'll the shalom pot back on. Again, if it's not going to work, and it's important for you to have that shalom pot or whatever that might be, the soup, whatever it is. Again, as long as we're talking, the food is still warm, edible warm. As long as it's still edible warm, even if it's not yatzaleva's way, you can do this.
The top of the pot, it's not feel hot at all.
It's not the top, it's the size. Size would be a better way.
Even if you have to let it.
It's not really the size, it's the actual food itself. But you stick your finger, it's usually very hot. But if it's cooled off to the extent that people would not eat it anymore. Most people would say, I don't want to eat this anymore. This is a cold dish. I don't want to have a cold soup. I don't want to have a cold shalom. That would be a problem, not only from chazara purposes, from bishul, like we said, because yesh bishul acher bishul v'davar when it cooled off.
Oh, right.
Over here, if the challah is still warm, the soup is still warm, and many people will still have it that way, it's okay to put it back under these conditions. And if you lost these conditions, you didn't have in mind, you didn't hold on to it, you have the other option of taking a frying pan and flipping it over on top of the blech. And in certain situations of times of need, you can even remove the blech and flip over a pot or pan and put it on top of the beer. So you don't need conditions of hazara in those situations.
Okay? You have to let it that hot.
Even to get it, even to boil it, as long as it was edible warm. As long as it was edible warm. So in the lechatchila, we should have these conditions, but if we weren't able to have these conditions, so then, because you need more schnitzels and they're in the fridge, or challah, that you need challah, you realize more people are coming, you need to warm up the challah. Even if it's not frozen, you just want to have hot challah. It's okay to put it in these areas. It's not directly on the fire. The blech itself is still considered directly, even though the blech is in between. You cannot put things directly on top of the blech where the fire is, unless you have these conditions. If you're missing these conditions, make it more indirect by flipping over a pan, and then it's really like considered on top of your challah pot, on top of your soup pot, where you're allowed to put anything where there is no concern of bishul. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Yeah.
Thank you so much. If I have some different things on top of my blech, am I allowed to move things around? If I want something on the fire, I don't have to soup on it until soup time is being served. Can I move things like they're all on the blech already? Something is direct on the fire, but I want something else is over here to be on my fire. It's like
Soup and
yeah, can we do that?
I was afraid of this question.
Okay, so save the next.
I didn't.
I didn't know.
Cooler off at the top.
Some place can hold, some place can hold. If it's very hot in that spot where it is, then you can move it back. Like if it's very hot, like it's able to cook it in that spot. Not all areas in the blech are the same.
I know.
Right.
And
By the way, if
I
it
don't
was,
feel
others hold that if it was if it was already originally on the fire, the soup, and then you moved it away, then and still in a spot which is warm, you can move it back on.
Okay,
But if you put it, move it to the other end of the blech where it's cold, and then you're moving it back, that's now you need the condition of Chazara and you lost it. So you would have to flip over the pan and do it like that, make it more indirect. So you're not directly cooking.
Let's have something else in the block that's in the cooler area, and now put it on top of that area.
No, it's cold, it's okay.
For dessert.
I would put it next to it, not directly onto it. Again, but you could, if the apple crumble cake is dry or it's still warm, right? Depending if it's still warm, if it's liquidy and still warm, if it's really dry, then if it's liquidy, then it have to be still warm to do this.
Still warm.
If it's a spot that's going to be coming out to lettuce.
Right, exactly.
If it's not going to be coming out to
Well,
lettuce.
let's say it's a gravy or a chocolate.
And again, if it's still warm, you can flip over a pan and do that. It's a good thing to know that if you have the blech and flipping it over is okay.
You share one fire for the soup and the chelling. That one, you're like.
I mean, if they're both
because you don't
on,
need
if
it
they're
right
both
next
on the
to you.
fire, someone on the fire, it's okay. Then they're still considered on the fire.
Big
If
pot.
they're totally off the fire, that's different. But if it's on the fire,
It's not getting like.
So let's say you have a gravy that's lukewarm and then you want to make it hot. Can you move that?
It's
It's not.
still warm and it's wet.
if it's still edible warm, enough that's edible warm, you just want to make it hotter.
It's wet.
Yes, you can.
Right.
Not a issue problem.
Thank you.
But what's considered a plug, like if you plug it in like a hot plate, it doesn't have any knobs.
No
It's
need
a
for
plug. You can return everything.
Correct? What with the conditions?
Right, with the
But
conditions.
this is considered
So if it
built-in
has a
black.
knob, like for high and low, you have to have a-
Right, but I'm not correct. But not you'll use a piece of silver foil or black, but not an on and off. If it's just an on and off,
Okay.
if the dial says
I don't
on,
even have it on, I just plug it in.
no black,
No, but my sister-in-law has the on and off, or,
not a problem.
no, I think she might have like a few.
If it says low, medium, high, you have to have a black, because then you could lift up the flame.
Okay, and I have another question, it might be from last class. Basically, like if you open a pot of soup, let's say, on the block, no, like, I know someone who does this, I'm not sure if she's right, like basically to serve her soup, she just moves it to the part that's not on the fire, like all the way far from the fire, but still on the block, and she serves her soup.
And what does she do
And then
then?
she,
What's the back? You're asking if it's okay to
like,
serve it
you
from
could
that
serve the
spot.
soup from on the block.
Yeah, as long as it's not in a
It's not
place,
like stirring or anything like that.
as long as it's not, if it's a colder area, it's not an area that can make it, cook it. An area in the black that's not really
And
hot.
like putting it back over your phone, like covering.
Putting a pan back, if you left it in the area, if you moved it to an area which is, Moshe Feinstein held, certain places can held that if you move it to an area which is still not directly in the fire, but it's off the fire and it's still hot, then you're allowed to remove from there and it's not considered stirring, and you could also still return it back. That was the chiddush. Yeah,
So you
Does
can
the
cover
Bible say
that.
that?
it doesn't say anything clearly in Alter Shulchan Aruch about this whole discussion. There was no bless then, and we don't know exactly. The question is, there's no inference.
So you could totally. do
Some
it.
people hold this. Some people, it's not everyone holds it, but some people
I
hold
always
that.
thought you have to take it fully off the block, even if it's cold.
No,
Even if it's like.
no. Cold areas in the black are just like the counter. Cold areas in the black are just they're cold. They cannot cook. They cannot do anything. Even if it's warm and it can't cook.
And so she could put
It's
it
also
back
not.
on, she could cover it from there and put it back.
Oh, put it back on is different. That you would have to, you should never move it all the way fully off. Move it off the fire and still in a spot where it's hot.
You could serve from that.
Move it a little bit, move it right off the fire from there
And you could serve,
and then push it back on. That's what some places can do.
and this also might have been last, but could you add like hot water from like a urn that was on the buck to the challenge? Like,
So you didn't miss it. We didn't get to discussing it.
oh, okay, fine.
You should do it from urn to the chalent. So the chalent bring the chalent to the urn, or bring the urn to the chalent. Put one hot water into the,
The hot water.
yeah, you just don't want to make your urn fleishig.
It has a cup of
So
coffee the
don't
next day,
let
and then
the
the steam.
Right, you don't want that hot steam going
how do
onto
you
the
do that?
spigot. So when you open it, just wait like a half a minute, like let it steam out, and then hold it like a little bit lower, not right close to the, as long as the steam is not very hot when it reaches the faucet, you're good.
Follow from the freezer, like sometimes it has like those wet, like, like the. freezer.
So wait for it to dissipate.
And then you can put it on.
Yes.
top of the pot.
Instead of
Thank you. I use John.
Yeah, no,
A hot plate without a knob, same way.
So if I want to put dry food, I have to put it on top of the upside down pan on the black. You can't put it directly on the black.
Not with a fire. Next to it, you could. Not.
No, sorry, not the black, the hot plate. So if I have a hot plate and I want to warm up dry schnitzel, I can't put it directly on the hot plate. I have to put it upside down pan and then put it on.
That's a good question. That's a big machlokes about it. It really depends like how good your hot plate is. Is it something that could cook or just there to keep things warm? It's just purely could warm things, then it wouldn't even need any of these conditions of chazara. Because it's not even a place that's normal to cook. If it's not a normal place to cook, and no one would cook on a hot plate, you wouldn't leave something there that's not fully cooked. Erev Shabbos, no one would do that. Then it would be okay. You wouldn't need any of these conditions. You wouldn't need to do that. But if it's something that can, for certain items, cook,
Like if it's hot enough to warm up your soup, then that's.
If it's hot enough to warm and if you can use it to warm up your soup, would be a problem. Even though it's not what normally you do, but if it can warm up soup, that's considered cooking. So then you would have to have the flipping over the pan. Depends what type of what hot plate it is. If it's a hot.
I've never figured out how to get a hot plate.
I don't know. I would have to have someone buy me all the hot plates and plug them all in, and we check them all. I mean, maybe there's hachsherim on them, and you can look around. I mean,
can you just cover the knob, or do you have to cover the whole surface?
If there's a few dials, it's better to cover it. If you don't have any, the main recognition is supposed to be between the pot and the heating element. But in a case of a situation where you're not able to do that, so then you can maybe remove the knobs. Some people used to remove knobs, making it difficult to turn the flame could also serve as a remembrance. But I wouldn't use that in regular situations every Shabbos.
My other question was about the Shabbos mode on the oven. Is that appropriate to use that to put on Shabbos mode?
Sure, it's only better. I think the companies work with Sharon, no?
So if it's on Shabbos
I don't
mode,
know the background behind electricity, but I in general, the old ovens are like the refrigerators. Most people open up refrigerators on Shabbos. So there's certain people that are machmir, they wait till the motor is on because they don't want to turn on the motor. Most people are lenient with that. We just open the refrigerator. As long as we're not leaving it open for a while, we open it, we take what we need, we close it. We don't leave it in a while, then we make it. If you have a Shabbos mode that will not change the temperature based on your opening the oven or the fridge, and that's the best thing to do. That if it won't make it, you won't make any changes.
Shabbos mode, I could take out some food. People have to take out one part and then close the oven.
If the Shabbos mode, I don't know how the Shabbos mode work exactly. I don't have it, but
it shouldn't immediately respond.
And it shouldn't be a problem. And you could put food from the fridge also into the oven or on Shabbos? No, because that.
No blech.
Right, no blech. And remember, even if there would be a blech, we still need the conditions of chazara. This thing was not on the fire of Shabbos, so you'd only be able to put it in a place where it's very abnormal, flipped over pan on top of the shalom pat. If it would have been, the chicken would have been there originally, and now you're returning it, but this thing was never there, so you're not returning it.
But not for warming up for what we discussed last week, just putting new food.
Exactly.
Shabbos days, just for Friday night.
Exactly.
We have this class in one of our portion for Wasanabe for the Russian.
I have no problem. Just
I just wanted to mention it in the course of the class. And are we allowed to make ice on Shabbos? Or that's another question for another time.
It's not a vishal shaila. It's just a general not connected to the shiurim. Some places can say yes, some places can say not. So it's not.
It's not like an easy yes or no.
What about when you take ice, you put it in water?
I don't have myself clarity. It's a question. You're not the Gemara clearly. The clear halacha is that you're not allowed to create liquid in Shabbos. You're not allowed to take snow and ice and crush it in Shabbos. The question is because you're creating a liquid. The question is now I didn't create a liquid. We now today can have freezers. We can create a liquid into solids. So is that a problem? So that there is no mention of that in original halacha because that wasn't really as common. I mean, I guess you could have theoretically done it the winter, put it outside. But it's not discussed at all. So on this generation, post World War II, you have places for discussing, would this concept apply to when you're creating ice? Is creating ice an issue or not? Some places are make, some are lenient. I would say it depends on the need. If your child really feels they want it and they need it, Chatchila try to do things that you need Erev Shabbos, but if it's a need and you're having guests, the Shabbat brachas is important, you definitely have who to rely upon to make the ice cubes on Shabbos.
So if you put it in an ice bucket, don't you have to put a little water first?
No, you don't have to.
If
No
you
one,
go to-
you're not drinking that water, you're spilling it out. No.
Why do people say that? Like, what was it in it?
It's based on this idea that you're not allowed to create liquid, so they say this liquid, but over here, you didn't do anything, you just put it in the bowl, you didn't create it, and not only didn't create it, you're not planning to drink, you don't want that water, you want the ice cubes. You don't want that water in the bottom, you don't like that water sitting there. You want to have really just cubes itself. You don't have to worry about that.
Thank you. The clarifications
No
are.
problem.
Nightmare. Thank you both. I appreciate it so much.
Because if Hazard the pot, should the pot be directly on fire or be hot, very hot?
Chazara? Definitely. Chazara, there's no din of a chazara if it's not directly in the fire.
Has to be directly there.
If to require conditions, but you don't need, if you took something off and you want to put it next to the flame, it's mutter, there's no conditions because you're not putting it directly on. As long as it's fully cooked, all these conditions tonight chazar only when in a case when you want to.
Directly on fire.
Exactly, but if you're putting it next to it,
And you don't even need.
no conditions as long as it's fully cooked. Black, schnitzel, it's not a problem. Then you continue.
And one more question.